This is Alex Skolnick from Testament, and you're watching Richard Metal Fan.
Hey, what's up, guys? Episode 344 of Richard Metal Fan Interviews, calling from Zoom, and I have the absolute honor and a privilege to speak with the legendary Alex Skolnick from Testament. How are you doing today, Alex? It's so great to be able to have you on here today.
Oh, too kind. Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Good to be here.
Yeah, anyway, kind of the format of the show is I want to do a rundown of your discography as I want to talk about the New Testament album, but take me back to young Alex Skolnick. So, kind of growing up, what were the first bands that got you into metal? What made you want to start playing the guitar?
Okay. Well, I wanted to start playing guitar because of early rock and roll and the Beatles, 50s rock, the bands that had influenced the Beatles, such as Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and 50s music was very popular when I was growing up, right around 1980, and there were a lot of movies about Elvis and Alan Freed, and I was just getting excited by all that music. And then I discovered Kiss, and that was the first hard rock I liked. And definitely Kiss sort of led me to metal. I think by the time I'd been playing for about 3 years, I discovered Van Halen, Ozzy with Randy Rhoads, so Michael Schenker with UFO. So I was already going in that direction. And then there happened to be this booming scene in the San Francisco Bay Area of extra heavy metal bands.
Nice. Nice. And then, of course, tell me about like starting up Testament. Of course, originally was called Legacy. So how'd you get to know like Chuck and Eric and everybody at the time?
Um, I heard about the band because they were doing a lot of support sets. There was a band that was brand new at the time called Slayer that nobody had heard of, but I was aware of them because I caught their very first show in the Bay Area. And then I couldn't catch their next show, but the next show had Legacy as a support act. And friends of mine went to the show and they said, yeah, Slayer was great, but man, this new band, Legacy, you got to check this out. We love this band. And a couple other shows. I think they opened for an early Megadeth show, and they kept getting really good support slots. So I kept hearing about them. And I was trying to put bands together on my own, and it was really difficult because I was young. Not that many students my age were playing music. And just around the same time, I was thinking, it might be nice to join one of these bands that's like up and coming and already playing the clubs. And almost as I had that thought, within probably weeks, the band Legacy needed a guitar player. And by that time, friends of mine who were kept going to the shows had gotten to know the band and they'd become friends. And they passed along the message. Hey, the guitarist who's the Eric's cousin, Derek Ramirez, he's leaving the band. They're going to need a guitarist. And we've been talking to them about you. And that was how it all started.
Cool. And then, of course, like Legacy, then of course changed the name to Testament. Was playing around locally around the Bay Area. Then you got signed to believe your first record label, Megaforce. So how did they find
Sure.
Testament?
So, yeah, it's just one of these small world situations in the music industry. Megaforce had been Metallica's first label, and it was sort of their on the job training. They had never worked with a band before. They they made a lot of mistakes. Obviously, Metallica got picked up by a bigger label, but the team at Megaforce was learning, and they in the meantime they started managing Anthrax and had gotten Anthrax onto a bigger record label. And they'd signed some more acts. I think they signed Overkill, King's X. So they were kind of an independent label, but they were on their way up. And I don't know how um, this connection happened, but somehow uh, I have my late father was a highly respected law professor, and he taught at Berkeley and Yale Law School in his early days. And somehow, one of my father's students wa became an entertainment attorney, and he was a friend of my family, named Elliot Kahn. Um, he'd actually been a member of Sha Na Na, believe it or not. And he'd done Woodstock, and he had all kinds of stories after leaving Sha Na Na in the early 70s. He had a knack for music law and went to law school, and he'd become this um, music lawyer. And I'm not sure how he knew John Easy. Somehow, either there was a contract or they'd crossed paths legally. And yeah, I had a good relationship, but they not close, but they knew each other and just enough so that uh, uh yeah, Elliot, my called him up and just said, "Hey, this kid I know, is a very good guitar player. Just joined a band, and I know, you deal with this kind of music, and they're called Legacy." So he told them about us. Elliot told Johnny Z about us and sent him our demo tape. And Johnny Z was interested in the demo tape, and he said, he wanted to hear more.
Cool.
So he sort now they call it a development deal. This at the time, it was very informal. Basically, it was, I want you guys to do some more. If I, I'll help you pay to record another demo. I want to hear some more music. Oh, and this was especially after we'd lost our singer. Like during the time we were negotiating with the record label, our original singer Steve Souza had joined the band Exodus.
Yeah, and then you got Chuck.
So yeah, and then we found Chuck Billy, and the label, was very supportive during that time. They could have just said, "Oh, you that's too big a change. We don't know what's going to happen with you guys," but they hung in there, and, and they songs and recording another demo, and then they liked us and started negotiating a record deal.
Cool. And then flash forward to 1987, you dropped The Legacy, in my opinion, one of the best thrash metal debut albums. So, how was the whole writing and recording process like for the debut full-length Testament album?
Um, Different than any other recording we would ever do in the rest of our lives. Yeah, it was the it was our debut album, so it was really like being a fish out of water. Now we had done two demos at that point, so we we'd gotten our feet wet with recording, but making a whole album is next level. So we learned the whole process of making an album. We also felt like it was Christmas time because we arrived at this studio where Megaforce had arranged for several of the art acts to record in upstate New York, Ithaca, and we didn't have any equipment. We were, we were all just dealing with amps that we either borrowed or bought used that were like barely hanging on. And we arrived at the studio, and there are just boxes and boxes of gear, new drums, new heads, new cabinets. And they said, this is all yours. And we couldn't believe it. Of course, the budget for all that equipment was coming out of our recording contract, but it was fine and it was a lot of fun. So, new equipment, new experience, going into record for the first time. And it was very, very precious learning experience. I mean, I think every time I've been in the studio since then, I've learned a little more. And now I have a really good idea what to expect, but at the time it's very scary.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when the album first came out, did you like start like touring outside of the Bay Area? What was like those first tours like?
Yeah, the furthest we had played outside of the Bay Area at that point was Los Angeles, and then a couple other shows in Southern California, not far from LA. But we never played out of the state. So yeah, that with this record, yeah, we began that process. And the summer it came out, summer of '87, we jumped into a van. And we had a van, we had a rider truck. I mean, it was very DIY.
Yeah.
Drove across the United States, arrived, just completely exhausted. Had like one full day to sort of catch up on sleep and get our act together. And then it was time. Then we had our first shows. They were in Florida, and then worked our way up the East Coast, and then through the Midwest, and all over the states. It was I think it was about a 5 week tour, maybe 6 weeks. But definitely we were definitely a different band by the time we got back, because it was just no substitute for playing in front of an audience every night or almost every night.
Yeah. And I noticed you also did like shows in Europe. I know you did like that Eindhoven 87 live stuff. So what was that like? Because I believe that was like your time, first time in Europe. What was that like whole experience
Yeah,
like being like, whoa, we ain't in
that
California
was
anymore?
incredibly exciting. I'm not sure. I forget the date that Live in Eindhoven was recorded, but I know it came up, I believe, while we were on tour in the United States. An offer came to come do that
Yep. June
festival.
8th, 1987.
June 8th. Oh, okay. Okay, great. Um, Gosh, that might have been before I'd have to figure out when these dates are. So I think the US tour was after that. Um, I could be wrong. Maybe but either way, it was very close to the same time. And yeah, we did that tour. We did the Eindhoven Festival, which was just on its own. But then we went back to Europe on tour to do a full tour, and then yeah, for the next few years we would do this pretty much every album, and it was about an album a year, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah, and speaking of, the next album, The New Order, love this
Hmm.
album. Great follow-up to The Legacy. Like it was only recorded like a year apart, like you mentioned. Like did you start writing for this album right after The Legacy came out?
Hmm. We were actually writing some of that on tour. I remember
Yeah,
going to Europe for the first time. I remember playing shows with Anthrax in the UK. Um, yeah, we started. I remember that getting calls from our managers saying, you guys are going to have to go back to the studio pretty soon. Make sure you you have some material. So yeah, we were putting that material together on tour. But it's amazing that that record probably has the songs that we play the most of in any given show.
like Into the Pit, Disciples of the Watch, Trial by Fire, all good shit.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing I love is like Disciples of the Watch was inspired by Children of the Corn. So were y'all like fans of that movie at the time?
I wasn't necessarily, but um I think yeah, when I joined the band, I remember the original singer Steve Souza and Eric and those guys were, yeah, they were huge fans of that movie.
Nice. Nice. And of course,
Oh,
like
and also we used to use the intro. We had intro music, and it was from that movie. There was some really scary soundtrack music that we would use as an intro, and I think yeah, that also helped inspire the song.
Cool. And one of my favorite songs is, of course, the last song, musical "Death," a dirge. I love that. I know it's dedicated to Letty Senergy,
In
Gary, or
Gary,
how?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's like I'm always curious about who that is and how that kind of like inspired that in a way inspired me the song.
Yeah, it was a family, but yeah, I think it was I think it was somebody who'd recently passed away. And yeah, we're all still really young at that time. We haven't really dealt with death very much. So I think, yeah, he was very shaken by that experience. It wasn't somebody that we knew, but he wanted to make that dedication. So
Mm,
and that's how that happened.
all right. Then next up, practice what you preach. I love this album. So, what was this like? Kind of like going from this to this. It's kind of hard to describe.
Yeah, it's different. It was different. I think at that point we wanted to make some changes because we'd already done two albums in the East Coast. Um, and yeah, I think we wanted to try recording on the West Coast for once and just try being home and not going away. Even though going away to do a record is great. I mean, it definitely helps you focus. But we already had that experience of just, sort of being cut. It felt like being cut off from the world. Especially because this was before social media, before email, before cell phones. And yeah, I think yeah, we wanted to try being in our home area. And Fantasy Studios was this legendary recording studio. Um, Creedence Clearwater's manager, Saul Zaentz, had started it. And it was also a record label. They were remastering a lot of important jazz records that had been out of print, and they were remastering them for CD. That was partly what inspired me to get more into jazz as a guitarist. I kept hearing these records getting remastered, and they gave me a whole collection of jazz albums as a client of the studio. But the process of recording was different too. Um, it was it had more of a live feel. I think, we wanted to experiment and get away from the way we had done the first two records, which is, from the ground up, which
Yeah,
is basically you record the drums, you play along on guitar, but your guitar just sounds terrible because you know you're not going to keep the guitar tracks. They're called scratch tracks.
yeah,
Um, and it was, this was a small studio, so that was really the only option. Going to fantasy, this is where major pop artists had recorded. I believe Aretha Franklin had done a record there. People like that on that level, and like Santana had recorded there. So they had the um, the right setup, the right amount of rooms, isolation booths, etc., to set us up so that we could record and play as a band like we would at a gig. And if we had a good take, keep the sounds.
cool.
So the result was, I think it just felt much more live.
Yeah,
A lot of what you're hearing there is us playing together. In fact, the title track, for example, "Practice What You Preach." I mean,
great song.
that was recorded, and that was recorded live. That solo that ended up being one of my signature solos. That was just done right there. I might have fixed a couple notes, although I'm not sure. I think it went down pretty close to live, and yeah, I mean, we were able to do it that way. Basically, live recordings, which are much harder to do with metal because metal has to be much more precise. It's not a jam band. It's not the Rolling Stones where or Bruce Springsteen, where it can just be really loose. It's got to be tight. But we were able to do it tight enough, and it was um, easy enough to redo stuff. So yeah, I liked how that record came in.
Yeah, and I know recently you pretty much played this album in its entirety. So what was that like, kind of like revisiting
And
these
it was
songs?
amazing to revisit old songs. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, and then flash forward to 1990, you dropped probably my favorite Testament album, Souls of Black. I love this
Hmm.
album. So, how was
Hmm.
that kind of like? What was the whole writing and recording process like for this album? And I know this year does mark 35 years of this album. So, how do you feel about this album now, 35 years later?
Oh, it's amazing. Wow. Wow. Yeah, I think it's got some great stuff. I mean, I think the verdict is that there are so many listeners that we hear from that just love this record and love the songs. We've been playing a few of those lately as well, and it's great to revisit. I remember at the time there was a lot of pressure because it felt like we were being rushed to do another record, and
Yeah,
at this point, we're pretty exhausted. We've done four records. We've had four record cycles nonstop,
yeah.
back to back.
Like, what keeps you guys like going during that time period? Because it was just like go, go, go.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was always a feeling that, we have to keep the ball rolling. And with this record in particular, we had a chance to support Judas Priest,
Nice.
and they had offered they were looking at having some more modern at that time bands, and they were looking at us and Megadeth together. But the only way
Yeah, but
that our
so you had to like record this in a hurry. I heard like Chuck was saying that in like an
so
interview or something.
yeah, I mean, I think creatively it would have made more sense to just tour for Practice What You Preach. That should have been part of the Practice What You Preach tour. And then we could take our time on the next record. But instead, okay, it became a new record. We had to get it out as quickly as possible. So, um, there's some things we probably would have done differently, but it's also got some really great moments.
Like Souls of Black. I love like the different versions, like the original version. Then there was the version on First Strike Deadly, and then of course
First
you've
Strike
got
Still Deadly. Yeah, we
yeah,
revisited it.
and you'd also
Yeah, that was
revisit it again
cool.
for Rock Band 2, which I thought was a. I honestly think that
Uh-huh.
version is better than the original, and I don't say that much about any re-recordings.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Yeah, that happens. Yeah, it's
yeah.
funny.
But being as this is now 35 years, is there a chance maybe you'll play this album kind of start to finish like how you did with Practice?
It's being talked about. Yeah, I can't say for sure, but it is entirely possible.
All right. And then the next album, The Ritual, I love this album. Did you really want to like take your time to like hone in your craft with this album?
Yeah, and we did. This one we took more time. The band took time off. I actually didn't take time off because I had gotten word that Stuart Ham, the great virtuoso bass player, was looking for a guitar player, and I went and auditioned for him and got the gig. So that was a big moment for me, and just to sort of set foot, establish myself outside of this sort of bubble I'd been in. As great as it was. It was so I went off and I did this instrumental music. But I was working on ideas with the band, and yeah, I think it's one of the more musically interesting recordings we've done.
Yeah. Then you sort
And I think if I could have done it again, I would have insisted we had like one like Into the Pit or some super fast song.
yeah.
But I think we wanted to try having a break from that. Um, but so there was definitely mixed feelings about the record because it didn't have that a 300 mile an hour song. But I think it's definitely stood the test of time.
Yeah.
People it's grown on people. I hear from folks that weren't fans of this record before, and now they've sort of come around to it.
Yeah. And then of course you toured for the Ritual for a little bit, and then it was around the time you left Testament. So how hard was it
Mhm.
to leave the band?
Oh, agonizing. Yeah. Yeah. It was like a five-way divorce, basically. Although I didn't know this at the time, I was sort of opening the gates for the other guys, some of the other guys to leave too, because nobody was happy. It was a really toxic environment before we had that term, but that perfectly describes it.
Yeah.
Like just nobody knew. I'll say it's nothing like that today.
Yeah,
You
like
know,
y'all all pretty much matured and all that good
yes,
stuff.
we may occasionally get on one another's nerves, but we can tease about it and
Yeah.
laugh about it. And it comes and it's gone. It's like it never happened. But back then, if you had some disagreement or you felt dissed by somebody, it stayed with you. And then the hostility and everybody was feeling it in different ways towards different members. Like there was just all this internal um, angst building. And I think me leaving certainly uh, you know, blew things up for a while. And then it was very quickly followed by Louis, the drummer. And then I think Greg would be gone within a couple of years or so.
Yeah.
And then there was a revolving door, the proverbial revolving door for a long time. But, when we reunited some years later in
Yeah.
the next decade,
Which we'll get there.
I think, yeah, a lot of that was things became water under the bridge. And we also like eased our way back into it. We
Yeah.
sort of took our time and just, and we actually didn't plan to have a resurgence. It really seemed like, okay, this whole, we were, one of these bands, you had a few, the bands that came before us that the band, supported in the early days, like Slayer and Megadeth. Okay, those had become like household names with awards and Grammys and things like that. And Testament got a lot of respect, but it was definitely like a lower tier band compared to those bands. Uh, and we didn't think it was gonna come back the way it did, but gradually things started building again, and it seemed like I think having learned a lot from the past, like all the mistakes that had been made, and a few new mistakes being made, but nothing like before. And
Yeah.
now the ability to learn from the mistakes, yeah, we're sort of able to build it back into an important band, and it doesn't, yeah, even though it's not at that level of sort of compared to the bands that had platinum albums and awards and stuff like that. It's at a pretty good level. It's actually the band's bigger than it ever was, really.
Yeah.
So it's been a really interesting journey.
Yeah. But then of course I know after you left Testament, you hooked up with Sabotage and you did Handful of Rain. Love this album. So
Mhm.
how'd you end up working with these guys?
Yeah, people love that record. It's great. That record really like has a cult following almost,
Yeah.
separate from the Sabotage fans, as great as they are. Um, yeah, it was interesting. So I was experimenting. I was putting bands together, some very short-lived, some semi-short-lived, but it was like starting all over that whole period in the from the early to late 90s. And by the end of the 90s, I had just decided, yeah, I really need to start over. Moved to the East Coast, got a university degree, studied with just heavyweights of jazz and world music, and just I just wanted to exist around music and musicians that were like some of my favorite sort of creative virtuoso musicians outside of metal. I thought I would come back at some point, but around 94 or so, yeah, I was still. figuring out what I was doing. And very sad, this terrible thing happened, with Chris Oliva, fantastic guitar player of Savatage, the original founding member of Savatage with his brother John. He had gotten killed in a car crash, and I'd
Wow.
gotten that news, and we were all affected by that. We'd known Chris. We had done a tour with Savatage. I'd been a fan of the band in high school too, so I was just crushed. And I don't remember when the call came in, but I started getting calls, and that John really loves your playing, man. And John Oliva, sorry, Chris. John Oliva was telling me that Chris Oliva loved your playing. If there's anybody that could finish this record we're doing, it's you. I
Yeah.
don't think he'd want anybody else doing it, and we just need the solos. Yeah, so how do you say no to that?
Yeah. And then, of course, going into 95, I know because a lot of people know that you were briefly played with Ozzy for a bit. So, what was that like working with him?
Yeah.
Because I know we lost him a few months ago. Is there like any special memories like working
Yes.
with Ozzy?
Yeah, well, it was a little chaotic. Um, yeah, I think they were going through a period where they they were sort of like re-visualizing the Ozzy show. Yeah, the guitar players had gotten a lot of notoriety. Obviously, the great Randy Rhoads, one of my biggest influences, yeah, was just a late legend at that point. Jakey Lee really got a high profile from that gig. But then I don't know what happened. There's plenty of stories, why that relationship fell apart. He'd been with Zach a number of years, but I think things were starting to split. I don't know if Zach was doing his own group yet, but he was stepping away, and Ozzy was trying out a lot of different guitar players. I heard about some really big names too that I was like surprised that it hadn't worked out. And anyway, I got to do an audition. The audition apparently went really well. Everybody told me he looked very happy, and called me back to the next day to come. And so we had 2 days, and then I found out we were moving to Birmingham. We'd been rehearsing in London, and we were actually moving to Birmingham to uh, rehearse there and do an unannounced show.
Wow.
And I think it was partly just to kind of keep Ozzy in shape, partly to audition me. And it was at a venue called Nottingham Rock City, which is still there. And yeah, it was totally surreal. I mean, it was a club gig. I mean, for Ozzy, a club gig. He's at this time an arena act. And it's a large venue, but very small for Ozzy. And Geezer Butler was the bass player, and it was just surreal. I just kept having to pinch myself. I was on stage with half of Sabbath, and we did a couple Sabbath tunes in the set.
Yeah. What was that like?
Um, it was just
Like,
incredibly surreal, amazing, totally
nice.
amazing.
Nice. And then kind of going into 97, you did the Skull Patrol. Like I was listening to that. It's totally different, friend. So what was that like working with them?
Um, I was figuring out what to do with myself, and it's kind of funny. I actually had a reel-to-reel. I'd acquired a reel-to-reel tape machine. Right, this is still at least 10 years before, yeah, we all had laptops with digital software on them. And just to sort of learn the ropes with this reel-to-reel machine, I was recording these demos, and I thought it would be funny to do music that sounded like crime music.
Yeah, it sounds like something could
Pulp
be from like a
Fiction.
crime TV show.
Oh yeah, exactly, exactly. Go Pulp Fiction had come out, and yeah, there was such there was so much retro flavor in the movie, and like references to um black exploitation films and the 70s and stuff like that. And a lot of that stuff had great jazz too. Like Quincy Jones had recorded some of that music. I believe Herbie Hancock did some. Obviously, Curtis Mayfield. And so I was getting back into, I was getting more focused on sort of jazz improvisation, but sort of giving it that, 70s crime drama flavor made it feel like, okay, it rocks a little harder than straight ahead jazz. And it was also just a great way to learn the ropes on my reel-to-reel machine and just write songs that were completely different than the way I was writing. Most of my compositions up until that point had been, riffs and solos and harmonies, just the tools of heavy metal.
Yeah. And that
So it was very different to, I'm so suddenly I've got, and I found these guys, this great bass player, Michael Manring. I'd played, he was friends with Stuart Ham and another bass virtuoso. He had hired me to play on his record. And he heard I was doing this and wanted to play. He just wasn't, he wanted to play in a band and get out. And he's such a great player. So he actually called me up and said, you know, if you're doing this stuff live, yeah, I'd like to do it. And I found a sax player, and I was able to do these demos, and just they're pretty good sounding demos, and yeah make them presentable to the band. And then I recorded with the band, and I considered the band recordings demos, but they were good enough to make into like a little EP that we sold at the shows. And people still ask me about the Skull Patrol disc. It's very funny.
Yeah. And then next up, I want to talk about is Attention Deficit. You did the two albums, the self-titled and the Idiot King. So tell me about that. Like, I'm digging deep. Like, nobody ever
Well,
talks
that was
about this
also with
stuff.
Michael Manring. Yeah, because I had recorded with Michael Manring. I played on his album, and this progressive rock label called Magna Carta reached out to him about doing an album that's totally improvised. And they had a whole series of these albums. They had one with Terry Bozzio, Steve Stevens, and Tony Levin called Blacklight Syndrome. There was another one with John Petrucci from Dream Theater, and I forget what that one's called,
I think was it
but
Liquid Tension Experiment?
Liquid, exactly, that one. Yeah, yeah. So they talked. Michael brought me into the conversation, and then we talked to Tim Herb Alexander of Primus, and I think Michael had him guest on a track as well, and that was kind of how that came together. But they they wanted us to do one of these albums and this improvised with the same, not sounding like, but the same sort of idea behind Liquid Tension Experiment.
Cool. Nice. And of course, going into 2001, you came back with T Testament. You did First Strike, Still Deadly. So how'd you end up coming back to the Testament?
Oh yeah, it was funny because I was at that point I'd moved to the East Coast. I'd moved to New York. I was a full-time student. I was you know studying with these jazz heavyweights. But the guys reached out and um, thought it would be fun to have me come in and record, and it was good. It was good. It was great to sort of get my feet wet with the music again. And I enjoyed it. And I remember thinking, I'd like to get back into having a metal band at some point. I didn't know it would be this band. At that also at that time, they're doing music that was, less focused on lead guitar. It was more, death metal, and I knew it was cool, but I thought they were going to go more in that direction. And then, when I finally did come back on a more regular basis, I said, we can still do those songs, but yeah, I'd like to bring back some of what we did initially. And the way I play is it fits, certain types of the more it really fits more over the type of music we used to do.
Cool.
Although now, we have this new music coming out that I've been involved with. And so, some of it is on the death metal side, but I've sort of found a way to take what I do and work with that style as well.
Nice. And then I think it was around the time you started up the Alex Skolnick trio. So tell me about like that. How'd that come to be to sort of like make, I guess, your own little band?
Yeah, well, it was funny. Starting the trio really taught me that it's really best not to plan anything. Because it was really accidental. I started a Skull Patrol in New York on the East Coast, and it was hard to manage because it's multiple people. We always had saxophones, sometimes we had keyboards, and yeah, it was just this either quartet or a quintet, and it was going pretty well. But just on the side, I also wanted to play like more chord melody jazz guitar. And I wanted a project where I could do that. And it was just casual, just to play like informally, no thoughts about doing records or touring or anything like that. And that was the trio. But friends of mine that I trusted, that I'd known for a long time, were would come up to me every time the trio would play and say, "Dude, this band, you got to do more with this band." And uh, it was very funny.
Nice.
And I think part of it was, we had this. It wasn't a gimmick or a novelty, but we did have this, something unique, which was that I was taking songs that I knew from my hard rock and heavy metal years and playing them in a jazz combo with upright bass and small drum kit and hollow body guitar. And they included Aerosmith, Kiss, Ozzy, Black Sabbath, Scorpions. Um, and nobody was doing that at the time. I can find examples now. I know a jazz singer who's pretty respected. She's a friend of mine, and she just did an album with a bunch of those types of songs. There's an Ozzy song, and there's an Aerosmith song. There's a group called Postmodern Jukebox that does like old-timey jazz versions of those songs. Really good too. But at the time, this was a radical idea, and
Yeah.
people got a real kick out of it because people in the audience, jazz fans, would recognize those songs. Of most people, even at jazz concerts, everybody knew these Scorpion songs. Everybody had been young,
Yeah.
and also I think there were just a lot more diverse listeners over the years. It became less strict, which is what I always fought for. I always thought just because guitar playing wise, just because I'm more influenced by Van Halen and Uli Roth and Gary Moore, why can't I listen to Wes Montgomery and Grant Green and all these great jazz artists?
Yeah. And then kind of in that same year, 2002, you did a Stratuspherius with the Adventures of Stratuspherius album. So tell me about that.
Well, that was a violinist who's good, still a good friend of mine, Joe Denenzone. And yeah, even before I was playing my own shows in New York, um, Joe already had gigs and he was working with different musicians. He's a virtuoso violinist. And he saw my name on a flyer for one of the school ensembles that was playing. It's very funny. And then came to the show because he'd seen my name and wondered if it was the same guy because he had the Testament records. And then was talking to me and said, I think, if you're interested, I think you'd be really good for these concerts that I'm doing coming up. And they were my first instrumental club gigs in New York. I eventually got busy with the trio, and
Didn't you also have Exhibit A at the time, or was that sort of like later?
that was a short-lived project from back when I was on the West Coast.
Uh,
Yeah, I never did any recordings or anything.
all right.
But between the trio and then Testament reuniting, and I started playing for Trans-Siberian Orchestra.
Which I love that
Um,
one album, The Lost Christmas Eve. Probably the best
yeah,
Christmas music ever.
yeah, it was fun. I just did the live tours. I played a little bit on the records, but there's a whole collective that was involved with the records. But it kept me busy, and I was playing with other artists as well. And
Yeah.
so Stratospherius was just a few years.
Yeah. You did
Joe,
Live Wires as well.
yeah, and again, we're still good friends, and he is the violinist for Kansas now,
Oh,
the
wow.
legendary rock band. Yeah.
Carry on, Wayward Son.
Yeah, so if you go see the Kansas now, Joe is playing the violin. So it's great. He's reaching a lot more ears now.
Nice. And then kind of going into 2005, you did Ofri Elias with Yacerio del Amor Latino songs. Tell me about that.
Oh yes, yeah. Yeah, well, Ofri is my ex, but at the time she was a singer and was doing an album of world music, and the musicians were very good musicians, but I was I really took on the role of co-producer. I was just sort of helping her make this album, but yeah, I'm never intended to be the guitarist. And I remember there was a guitarist involved with the sessions, and I was showing him the parts, and some of the other musicians started whispering, why isn't he playing the guitar part? And I just it was interesting because I thought, I didn't think I was qualified. I thought this is world music, this is a very specific. But the more I listened to it, the more I thought, okay, I can understand this. And I'd always been a fan of Al Di Meola, for example, and that's great guitar playing that also has a lot of international flavor. And I think I'd absorbed that. So anyway, my role on O'Free's project kept getting elevated, and it was really yeah, it was very useful for me. It was very I grew a lot, I think, from doing that record.
Nice. And then, of course, I know you did the next two Skolnick Trio albums, Transformation and Last Day in Paradise. Like, tell me about
Hmm.
those albums because I feel like they kind of are like brother and sister in a way.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, our original bass player, who his name's John Davis, he had done the first recording, and fantastic bass player, who's now more of a recording engineer, but he just engineered and played on a record by Brad Meldau, who's like, one of the greatest piano players of my generation. So he's doing fine, but he had left at the time. He really wanted he wanted to play indie rock, and He had a band that it looked like it might become the next Radiohead. They got a big record deal. Didn't happen. But we needed a bass player fast, and we found Nathan Peck. He had grown up in Pittsburgh with Matt, my drummer. So the next two records had a different flavor because we brought in Nathan. But and then we sort of, we had a slightly different sound, and just working with a different person. It definitely created a new vibe for the group.
All right. Then going into 2008, you did, I guess, the Formation of Damnation, which I think was a great comeback album at the time, and pretty much my
Mm-hmm.
introduction to the band. So, what was it like making
Yeah.
this album?
Well, it was exciting. I mean, like I said before, we didn't know that we were going to resurrect the band. But by 2008, we had been doing occasional shows for a few years. We were called Weekend Warriors. We play a show or two on the weekend, go back to our lives. For me, it was music. I was still work doing music full time, but a couple of the other guys had jobs. Truck was working in trucking, and yeah, it just looked like it was going to be this occasional thing that we do on weekends or maybe a week or two at a time, no more. And then by 2008, we got this great offer that we heard that Heaven and Hell, which is Black Sabbath with Ronnie James Dio, was going to
Legends.
be touring, yeah, with Judas Priest and Motorhead
Wow, what a
together.
lineup.
And they wanted a fourth band. And if we could have a new album and get our crap together, we could do it. So, we just we sat down, we talked about it. Everybody. I remember, Chuck at that time didn't want to tour too much. Um, he was still like easing back into it. I didn't want to be pushed away from my instrumental side. I wanted to do it, but keep have a balance with, and be the musician that I become. And everybody had their own concerns, but we talked about it, and everything was understood, and we said, okay, let's do it. And we planned out the sessions and started writing, and it went really well.
All right, but tell me about like this. Of course, playing with Paul Bostoff on this album. What was it like working with him?
Yeah, that was exciting. By the time we went in the studio for this record, Paul was the drummer. We'd had a few different drummers. Originally, John Tempesta was going to do the record, and he got hired by the Cult. Then Nick Barker, he was best known for Cradle of Filth at the
And
time,
Dimmu.
and Zimu, of course, yeah. Um, he toured with us. I always thought I liked Nick a lot, like his drumming. I always thought it was a bit of an odd fit, especially when we would do the classic tunes. Um, and then Paul had been playing in Exodus at that point. He hadn't rejoined Slayer. And then he had left, or they decided to part ways, and suddenly Paul didn't have a gig. And then everything fell into place when it was time to do this record. He came on board, and it just felt great. And I'd never played with Paul before, and suddenly, it in all respect to Louis, the original drummer, but Paul was, just next level.
Yeah,
And since then, the band had had a lot of good drummers. They did a record with Lombardo, they did a record with Hoagland, Tempesta. So the drumming standards got much higher, and that inspired me. Suddenly, I realized, okay, this is going to be different than the old days because now, I'm much more inspired, and that inspiration certainly found its way onto the recording. We did the recording in time to do the tour with those great bands, and it was called the Masters of Metal Tour. And I would say that was the moment that we're back.
yeah.
Testament is back, ladies and gentlemen.
Hell yeah. Then you toured for a little bit, and then of course 2011 you did the next Alex Skolnick Trio album, Veritas. I love that album. What
Mhm.
was that
Thank
like?
you. Um, yeah, that was I think at that time that was the most original songs I did. I was sort of shifting away from doing covers and doing more originals, and also just not worried about styles. I'm not worried about what the jazz guitar fan will think. Yes, it's jazz guitar, but there's an acoustic track, there's an electric track. I just at that point I kind of felt like I'd proven I can play jazz guitar professionally, and I felt like freedom to experiment and explore different sounds and explore different compositional styles.
Cool. 2012, Dark Roots of Earth. I love this album. Probably the best
Hmm.
modern Testament album. But what was it like
Yeah.
making this album?
Yeah, I agree. That was interesting because Paul, we started that out, and at this point, um, a lot of the writing sessions start with Eric and the drummer. It used to start out with Eric and I together, writing style together, and he really likes to work one-on-one with the drummer first thing, and for some reason it wasn't working out with him and Paul Bostaff. And I had my issues with Eric in the early days, musical differences and whatnot. So I immediately thought, oh yeah, the problem's Paul, you know. Um, but then I came to one of the sessions and I saw what Eric was talking about. It was just the chemistry wasn't there. And Paul's a great friend. He's a great drummer, but I totally could see that for what was needed to compose. And also, when Paul had come in for the previous record, most of that was already written. So he just came in and nailed it, and it was great. But for the beginning of the process, we needed somebody new, and Gene Hoglan was brought in and made perfect sense, and it was great to work with him. So that certainly gave the album a different flavor.
Yeah, love songs like Rise Up, but even like
Hmm.
Cold Embrace. I love like the Throne of Thorns. I know there's like the two versions. I have the deluxe edition. There's this, and then there's an
Hmm.
extended version, which is like 35 seconds longer. But I also love that covers you
Yeah.
did. You did like Queen and Iron Maiden. So what made you guys decide to do those cover songs in particular?
Yeah, well, the record label wanted some extra songs, and I know the Queen song was thought of by Tiffany Billy, and she's Chuck's wife, but works with the band, right, as a production manager. And she had heard that song on the radio, Dragon Attack, and suggested it. And I thought, oh yeah, why has nobody thought of that? That is perfect.
Nice, nice. And then of course, flash forward to
Rushmore
yeah, you were
of
saying.
great kind of hard rock heavy metal bands from the 70s that were thrived in the 80s. It would include Judas Priest and Iron Maiden and Scorpions. And those bands inspired us a lot. So that was why the other songs chosen by those bands.
Yeah. Then flash forward to 2015, you did the Metal Allegiance album with, of course, David Ellefson, Mike Portnoy. So how'd that project come to be?
Um, that came because of there was a cruise at that time. Um, Musical cruises were starting to happen a lot, including heavy metal cruises.
Like
They're pretty
70,000
common now.
tons.
Yeah. And Motorhead had just done a cruise, and it was called the Motor Boat. And Megadeth was supposed to play, had to cancel last minute. So to fill their spot, Dave Ellefson and Mark Mengy got together and decided to do an all-star jam, with the key members being Mengy, Ellefson, and Mike Portnoy. And they put together this jam, and like a lot of players from different bands were part of the jam. I was part of the jam. I had never jammed with them before. It went so well that afterwards they talked to me about doing more. And within a few days, they told me they were actually thinking about writing original music and just making a whole original project where we could play live, play original songs, but also do great covers and bring in all stars and stuff like that. And within a month or two, yeah, I was right at Mike Portnoy's house with the other guys, right? The four of us writing that record, and it just ended up being this super ambitious project, but a great record that we're all proud of.
Yeah. Then 2016, you did Brotherhood of the Snake, a great album. What was that like following up Dark Roots of Earth to Brotherhood of the Snake?
Yeah, this one I really like the songs on it. I know there was
Like
some definitely
Pale
some.
King, title track,
Oh,
Stronghold.
absolutely. Yeah, it came out great. I think there was some tension between Eric and Chuck. They've talked about it
Yeah.
on the record. I think Eric really was trying to assert himself on this one. Um, but there's some great moments. It came out great, and
Yeah.
I think yeah, he really wanted to be the main writer on this one. Um, but I love how it came out, and the songs. I think the songs from it are songs we'll be playing for a long time.
Yeah. And of course, you also got Steve DiGiorgio back in the band. So what was
That's
that like
right.
playing
Yes.
with him?
Yeah. So that also re-energized the band, I thought.
Yeah.
All respect to Greg. Greg Christian's a great bass player,
I think
but
Steve is great. In my opinion, one of the most underrated bass players in metal.
yeah, absolutely. I felt when Steve came, between him and Hoagland, and then me with the stuff I'm doing outside of the band as well, and the core guys of Eric and Chuck who've held it down the whole time, it felt like a super group.
Yeah. And then, of course, going into 2018, you did the last trio album, Conundrum. Tell me about that.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Well, Conundrum, uh, yeah, I've sort of reached a point where I feel like I can do anything I want, and I'm just very creative and constantly recording music, recording musical ideas, and Conundrum is just a nice collection of musical ideas.
Yeah. And then kind of going into, of course, 18, 19, you're playing live with Testament. Then, of
Hmm.
course, like that certain virus that I refuse to name happened. And I know it really kind of like fucked up like the whole music industry. So
Yeah,
for you personally, how did you manage to cope with that? Because I know that was like a hard time for the music industry at that time period.
yeah. It's funny. I'm more of an introverted person, so I don't go out much. I'm not craving social activity. I'm comfortable being social, but I don't require it like some friends of mine do. So I was perfectly fine. I I started a podcast. I got some new guitar techniques down. I started doing a lot more video content. I started doing collaborations on video. One of my collaborations was with Charlie Benante of Rush, Anthrax and Pantera, and Rod Diaz, who's now in Korn. And we were doing tributes to Neil Peart. And they were some of the first collaborative videos at that time. And we did a bunch of them. We did enough. In fact, they were released as a whole disc. And
Yeah.
it was,
Was
yeah,
it
and I had a lot
packed?
of experience. Hmm?
Yeah. Was that packed?
No, Pact was a different project.
Oh,
I
yeah.
know there's so many.
Yeah.
No, this was the Rush tribute.
Cool.
Um, and yeah, Pact came right around that time. That was Percy Jones, the legend from Brand X, and who I'd been listening to for a long time. Kenny Grahowski, one of the great drum virtuosos of today. Tim Motzer, who is a experimental guitarist who often doesn't sound like a guitarist. He often sounds more like a synthesizer player. And just that just took happened very naturally. And we toured this year. It was great. We've done several tours. We've done several recordings, and it continues.
Yeah. And then of course the last Testament album, Titans of Creation. I love this album. This pretty much got me through like the whole pandemic. So what was that like recording process like?
Cool. Cool. Well, that it was actually recorded before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was cool. That was the first, it was the only repeat lineup we'd had since the
Since the classic
Testament
days.
reunion. Yeah, since the reunion and resurrection. We'd never had the same lineup on two records in a row.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, I think that definitely added something special to the record. This new record that's about to come out has another
Yeah.
change. I mean, we have a new drummer. His name's Chris Dovis.
A buddy of mine.
And that yeah, that record is coming out soon.
Yeah.
Para Bellum.
Yeah. But we'll get there in just a sec. But before that, I want to talk
Okay.
because it's listed on Metal Archives, Hush Money in 22. Tell me about that.
Ah, ah, ah. Oh,
Sounds like a rap group or something.
yeah, that was it was. I mean, it was basically my it was a rap duo. Yeah, it's funny. People talk about what I did during during those years, the lockdown years. And I was also I'm not quiet about public events. I tend to express myself, and doing I did a couple different rap songs, and one of them was with a friend of mine, Kimmy Gordon, who's a very good rapper. He's also a videographer, and yeah, we called ourselves Hush Money,
Yeah, that
and
sounds awesome.
our track was called Big Lie. We only did one song so far, but you never know.
I
So
gotta check
we'll
that
have
out. Yeah. But now, of course, we got the upcoming Testament album, Para Bellum, which comes out on
yeah.
October 10th. So, what was the whole writing and
Mhm.
recording process like for the new Testament album?
It was good. I met with Eric several times on the West Coast and the East Coast. He worked a lot one-on-one with Chris, the drummer. Um, there were mostly sessions of like two or three of us at a time, but I thought it was really good. We all got together, all five of us, for the final sessions and also for the arrangements and just talked about the arrangements, talked to, yeah, yeah, I think everybody's happy with how it came out.
Yeah. And musically, did you want to continue in the
Oh,
same
we also
vein?
have a different mixing engine.
Yeah. And musically, did you wanted to continue in the same vein as Titans of Creation, or with Parabellum, you wanted to try something new or different that Testament hasn't done before?
I thought we should try something different. I mean, we have a different drummer. He brings a whole new flavor. He's young, he's current, he's 27, so we kind of let him
Yeah.
inspire the record in a lot of ways. But also there's a slow tune. We haven't done a good a ballad in a while, and this is like, I think it's the one of the best ballads we've ever done. I brought in a friend of mine who is a cello player, records, artists like Coldplay and Evanescence, and he did a string arrangement on the song, and I think it's gonna blow people away. I'm very excited about it.
Yeah. And what would you say like the overall like themes and sort of like the messages for Parabellum?
Um, I think a lot of it just has to do with we've always written about current events, but it's now with technology's gotten very, very scary. And we in the past, we often wrote about sort of dishonesty and conflict, human conflict. So that's all there, but also talking about how, technology is contributing to that.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course you mentioned like of course this is the first album with the your new drummer Chris Dovis. So did he bring
Yep.
something like new to Testament that y'all didn't have before?
Oh, absolutely. I think, when you get somebody young like that, who's, different generation, very up on current music, bands that are his age or just slightly older, that maybe we're not as familiar with. We're all kind of in our bubbles. Yeah, it really opens things up, and there's like a youthful energy that wasn't there before. He's also got a lot of maturity, but combined with youthful energy.
Yeah. Yeah, and how would you say like the songwriting process has like changed even from like like the Legacy of New Order to now with Para Bellum?
It's different. I mean, as I mentioned, Eric's only he held it down all that time, even during the years I wasn't there. So, in the very beginning, a lot of the music, was basically in E, just very fast, all in a lot of it in the same key. And with me, he sort of learned how to do harmonies and change keys around. And now, he's got much more of an imprint on it. I do a lot of suggestions. I do bring in some music, but he definitely has a bigger role now, and that works fine because it's what he does. So I have to go to my next interview. Sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And so kind of like also in the end to sort of wrap things up, what's next for Testament? I know we got the new album coming out next month. Is just anything else you like to also plug in terms of like tours and stuff?
Well, my trios album is called "Prove You're Not a Robot." That comes out November 12th. And we have a new single that just dropped today. It's a cover of Breakdown by Tom Petty. And my website is alexskolnick.com. Just got redesigned, so go check it out. And keep an eye out for the new Testament record and the new trio record.
Awesome. So
Uh,
so thank you. So everybody, Alex Skolnick from Testament, and we'll see you next time.